All right, welcome back to Recovery Machine. I am your co-host, Corey. I'm here with co-host Nathan, as usual. Good evening, Nathan.
Good evening. Yes, it is evening now.
How are you tonight?
I'm good, I guess. Anticipating a successful surgery tomorrow to finally fix my nasal deviated septum situation so I can breathe at night, which will mean hopefully that I can sleep. And that would be terrific because I got to tell you, it is getting to be a bit of a situation. Having a lot of trouble. I can fall asleep, but deep sleep is few and far between. So hopefully this will be the remedy. And the idea is if we can get my nose opened up, then I'll be able to I'll have more options for CPAP and keep my oxygenation levels up above 10% would be nice. You know?
Yeah. Well, anyone who knows you well enough to know that that's an issue that you've struggled with, I know, is wishing you well on the eve of this procedure. And I'm glad we can get an episode in before your fast kicks in as well. And
yeah, well, it was a surprise because I got a 37 person. There's 37 people on the wait list here in Kelowna, and somebody dropped out, and then they just start phoning, and whoever picks up first. Yeah, so I was lucky.
Yeah, absolutely.
but no, not much for notice, but that's fine. I'll take it.
Cool. Well, again, congratulations on that. We'll anxiously await the news of your improvement.
Yeah, I might look a little funny next time you see me, but that's all right. As long as I can breathe.
Yeah. So tonight we wanted we've been bringing up news stories as they've hit, and we brought up some current events within the healthcare recovery context, within the drug and substance use policy context. But we wanted to focus tonight a little bit on something a little bit different, and it is the stories of healthcare workers and addiction, or healthcare workers and drug diversion, substance use, whatever it may be, that hits the news. And over the last 10 years or so, these are stories that have come to my attention, even came to my attention before addiction came into my life and was a part of my life. But I was aware of them and uncomfortable with them then. And I can tell you, I've only become more and more uncomfortable with them now as I've learned more, and as I've imagined myself on the side of the nurse or pharmacist or professional who is now in the media.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's pretty wild that this stuff is allowed to happen. I mean, the one specific that we're starting with here, I believe, is a case from around 2015, 2016, something like that.
Yeah.
But it's a good example of the language and the tone that's used. You know, I understand that reporters have to put out material that's supposed to be, they want to engage, they want an emotional response, but this comes off to me as heartless and ingenuine. I mean, it's not there's double speak throughout the articles. There's it's just, there's ignorance on such a plain, obvious level in many ways that it's shocking. I mean, it's something that you would expect from a lot longer ago than just 5 or 6 years.
Yeah.
And I know we've had, we're improving, right? We're definitely trending in the right direction. And there's a lot of positive stuff going on, but man, when you see articles like this, it reminds you of the level of ignorance.
That's right. It does. And we'll get into these stories in just a moment here. But I think what we want to share is that these things are not only harmful to the individual whose story is now being told and made public, and their privacy is lost there, but it's also potentially harmful to the professional who's maybe in the shadows, maybe tempted to come forward, maybe wants to create a change in their life, and seeing that this could be made so public and their privacy could be lost is certainly going to promote them staying back and staying hidden.
Well, yeah, and it's hard to know which of the two is worse. I mean, certainly it would feel horrible to have this kind of exposure, and I mean, I don't know how an individual would deal with that on top of what you're already dealing with as far as a drug addiction goes, and all the legalities and stuff that are involved with going back to work. But it's any kind of, if you look at this situation and you say, what would be best for everybody involved? I think we've said it before when we talked about transparency and a level of openness and professionalism that allows for people to come forward without this kind of knee-jerk shame type response. Because
Exactly.
if you're actually trying to make a workplace safer, not just for the employees, but everybody, the people who are going into the hospital, anyone who's involved with what's going on there, you want to be able to come forward and say you've got a problem. And these type of articles really put pressure on people to stay in the darkness, right?
Yeah.
And the longer you stay in the darkness, you increase the chance of hurting somebody. You increase the chance of killing yourself. It's what we are trying to. That's really what we need to change. And this is material that works against that.
It really is. Nathan, before we get started, what would your personal reaction what would that have been? Think back to right when you came forward and went off work. If this story got leaked and you opened up the provincial newspaper and here's your story, what would you have done at that time when you were just on the cusp of crisis?
Well, at that time I was pretty broken down, and I basically didn't care. I wasn't thinking about my image in the community or my professional reputation at all. I thought that those things would be destroyed. I just knew that the only way I could get the ball rolling was to do what I did. And I mean, obviously, looking back on the way things went there were, I could have taken legal action. The way that situation was handled still was not great, but I'm not, I still own the problem. And I believe that I did what I had to do there. So I don't have any concerns with that, but it would be hard to imagine, you're so vulnerable in that state, and you already feel not just physically like shit and spiritually like shit. You're already, you know that you're losing it, right? Mm-hmm. So to have that kind of publicity, I mean, personally, I think I could take it, but it would be the fact that I know my parents and my friends that's what would get me. I think I would probably be calling a lawyer if I saw something like that go on. Yeah. That would most likely be my response, but it would be a slow response in comparison to what I would do now.
Yeah, sure. Fair enough. I think for me, it would have really put me at risk. Like I think of how high my anxiety level was within the first 2 weeks of going off work. And without having built up some of the skills about managing my anxiety and managing my mental health, I think I would have been at high risk for, I don't know if I'll say high risk for suicide, but I think that would have crossed my mind. I think the feeling of that level of exposure and that level of loss of any kind of privacy, any kind of autonomy would have been really harmful.
Well, it's certainly going to drive you deeper into the darkness, right? I mean, The first thing you're going to do is respond by isolating Like, it would be hard not to, you'd want to hide, you'd want to turn off your phone. You wouldn't want to look at any media, and then what do? You're alone with your thoughts. This is eating at you. Like that's gasoline for addictive behavior, right? So
It is.
yeah, it would definitely add to an already grueling uphill battle, I would say at the least. And for
Big
some
time.
people, if they were using drugs already to deal with a situation that they found insurmountable before without leaning on some kind of a substance, then I could see that being the thing that tipped them over the edge. And I'm sure it's happened before. People have been publicly shamed, publicly humiliated to the point where they just, and it could be maybe they didn't even mean to overdose or whatever. They just really went crazy that night because they,
exactly.
Yeah.
There's a consequence to these things on either way. So we'll get into this first example of a news story that can be harmful. And this happens to be a big one. Like we said, this goes back to 2016 that these articles were written. We don't want to disclose this individual's name. Her name was disclosed in full in the stories, in addition to her family's name. Given that we take objection to that, the fact that her name was released, we'll call her K. We'll call her just first initial K. K was a care aide in the largest hospital in Vancouver, a well-known care aide, a well-liked, sounds like a well-respected care aide, who at the time it wasn't known that she had, known by staff that she had an issue, past history with drugs and alcohol, though she did, and as the article states, she had been through treatment a couple of times, it sounds like, but was ultimately found having overdosed in her house. And there was evidence that she had been taking large quantities of medications from the sharps bin at work. Now, because she was a care aide, she didn't have access to some of the medication dispensing machines, so that it wouldn't have been that she could be falsifying charts and just taking it out of the computer or out of the machine, but she would have been taking it probably off the counter from syringes that were already drawn up or out of the sharps bins. So there was evidence of that, and evidence of urine samples that she was keeping in her house in case she had to provide a urine sample to her employer. It didn't say in the article if she was on a monitoring program or not, but it sounded like they did say that she did have to give, they said sort of occasionally, urine samples. So to me, that sounds like it was probably a monitoring program that she was on there. Now, the details of around her death, that's sort of all there is to say. There was that there was evidence of medication and supplies from work found around her in her home when she was found. There's a few areas where I take exception. It was some of the language that was used in the article, and I think it's important to highlight a little bit of that language to show how cold and callous and demeaning and ridiculing and harmful this language was. And this not only exposes the how poorly a healthcare worker who's going through addiction is treated, but also just people who use drugs in general, the opinion of at least of this writer with the media and this newspaper who then released the story, and the editor who read it before it was released. Do you have any of those examples in front of you, Nathan?
Yeah, I do. And this is the Vancouver Sun, by the way. So,
yeah,
I think you gotta, whatever publication you're putting out there, you gotta kind of stand behind the type of language that's showing up on your pages.
Yeah.
And it's the tone, I guess, of it. I mean, the terminology used regarding the diversion is always pilfered or stole,
ransacked,
hoarded, and it's as if they're insinuating like many of the vials of opiates she stole had patients' names and other identifying information, as if she had some motive, or as if she was actually stealing medications from patients.
Yeah,
which is not. There's no indication that that's what happened. This is either, it's most likely a misunderstanding by the person who's writing the article, and also putting a little bit of a twist on there to make it look like she was maybe taking drugs right from a patient. That's kind of what they're trying to do there. And look, this is, from my understanding of what's being read here, despite the way it comes off, it looks like we have somebody who had already been to rehabilitation services twice. So this person had a known problem, and was somebody who was allowed to continue to go back to work under whatever circumstances. I think that was one of the questions that her mom, one of the biggest questions her mom had was why was it that even after knowing she had a problem, not once, but twice, you let her go back into that area? And then how did she manage to get, so, when they found her, she'd OD'd by she took a medication that was an anesthetic medication that she must not have known or realized or whatever. Muscle relaxant, I think, is what it was. And it paralyzed her, right?
Yeah.
But she had enough access to have a healthy habit going in there, and everyone was confused by that, or acting confused by that. And this Vancouver hospital spokesman, Gavin Wilson, this guy, I've seen him a few times where every time they interview him, he'll say something like this. It's like, thefts of narcotics and other drugs are rare. The health authority acknowledges that even with existing protocols, this tragic incident showed that there is still a potential for someone to gain access to trace amounts of drugs, as if the place is not awash in accessible drugs. And this wasn't some super sleuth, evil genius who figured out how to break into a Bixus machine or something. She's just taking stuff that's laying around because it's laying around all over the place.
Yeah.
And it sounds like the family was stonewalled. Basically, it says family said they had been blocked in their attempts to get answers from the hospital over matters such as how it's able to access so many drugs. And they respond with what they always respond with, which is BC law limits the information it can reveal about any employees without the employee's consent. Well, the employee is dead. And the mother, who we're assuming would have power of attorney this side, she's probably the executor of the will. I would say has a right to know why her daughter had access to, and these things are tough in that I believe there's still an accountability issue here, and always will be, and that's fine. What our source of contention here is with the wording that's being used, the obfuscation of the facts by saying things like people taking drugs like this, healthcare professionals taking drugs from work is rare. It's not rare.
It's not.
We know it's not rare. We know that 10% of everybody working in healthcare right now in North America is on something right now. Okay. Yeah. And it just so happens that doctors, anyone who's got access to opiates has a 5 times higher chance of it being an opiate or a prescription med, because that's what's there.
Yeah.
This is what this is somebody who, they had some personal problems, it sounds like, and went down a road, and probably, they tried to, I don't know how long she was sent to rehab. I don't know what kind of treatment it was. My personal views on this are that I think everyone deserves a chance, but there should probably be a limit of some sort. And if especially if you're returning to the same site. If you're returning to the same site, I really don't think that's a good idea under any circumstances. Get my personal opinion. I just think it's very difficult for people to go through treatment and then, go right back into that environment again, even if they have lots of time. Some people can do it. Some people can't. It's just evaluating the risk is worth your time. There should be some thought put into it. But in this case, Corey, she'd had 2 kicks at the can here, right?
Yes. So this was essentially round 3, it sounds like.
Yeah.
And I mean, there are so many issues. I couldn't agree more with all of the things that you brought up there. I think an interesting detail of this was that this individual was a care aide. So they're not under a governing body who is putting forward a consent agreement for that individual to sign that would then put some limitations and put some control on where they would work, what they would go back to, and just what that return to work would look like, and provide some parameters there that could keep them safe. And as much as those of us who've been through it, it's a very difficult process to go through a consent agreement, but it is designed to keep us safe. So for a profession that doesn't have a governing body, that presumably wouldn't have to sign a consent agreement to go back, there's a big problem. And then to go back to, I don't know the exact numbers, but certainly that emergency department is within the top 3 busiest emergency departments in our province, which means, like you said, that it would be awash with narcotics and controlled substances, and that they would be absolutely everywhere throughout the course of a shift. Mm-hmm. And is that it's one question to ask to the individual, is this the best choice for you to go back into that setting? But also to the employer and to the union who's supposed to be protecting that employee. What are you thinking? Why roll those dice? It doesn't make any sense to me.
No. And if you're if you're VGH or that health authority, if there is no, like you say, governing body for care aides, then doesn't all the responsibility of whether or not their employees are safe to be working, for one thing, and then have a safe place to work on top of it, aren't those responsibilities then VGH's responsibilities? And if so, I mean, you got to think that maybe because this is in Canada, did the mom attempt litigation? Because
I don't think so.
Yeah. I don't know how much, what her resources were, and who knows how, like she says here, she tried to get answers. Her family said that they have been blocked in their attempts to get answers from the hospital over matters such as how Kay was able to access so many drugs. BGH says BC law limits, that's the part where they talk about the consent. And well, when the reporter talked to her, I guess she said, when you lose a child, your life is changed forever, of course, who's been grieving unrelentlessly since she lost her parents, brother, father, daughter. So this woman was probably in under so much grief that it would have been difficult to form any sort of plan, I guess. But, and it's always the same old story. Despite all of our safeguards, if there's a determined individual who has legitimate access to narcotics, but disregards professional and ethical standards, they can find a way to circumnavigate the system. Oh, yes, that's a more realistic view of what's going on. I think that's really how they should be looking at this. It's not a solvable problem through just restricting everything to the point where nobody can do medicine anymore because it takes too long to get a vial out of the cabinet with the lock and the vault, and the patient dies before they get anything. Emergency rooms in acute care settings are busy places where there's a lot of dynamic kind of decisions being made, and And that's sort of the nature of the business. So I think you sort of have to accept a certain level of, there's just going to be a certain level of potential there all the time. But maybe it would be better if, like how we said before, if it was easier for people to come forward and say they had a problem without facing, immediate, any kind of backlash like this.
Yeah. The tone of the article is almost painted as a cautionary tale in some ways, that caution to the public, caution to other healthcare providers that this could happen, and that this is, what did happen. But again, the risks of exposing someone to the point that she was exposed in this story is shocking. There's a photo of her home.
Yeah.
A very clear photo of her home where the reporter uses the term that it was a squalid pigsty.
And underneath, it's garbage and drugs. That's the headline, right? Like, healthcare worker died from an overdose in her Surrey home, surrounded by squalor and piles of syringes and drug containers she pilfered from biohazard waste bins at VGH. And then they give this person credit for the picture, like they're like anybody deserves credit for that picture.
The shameless tackiness of that phrasing is appalling to me. First of all, we're talking about an individual taking drugs from work and who died. What right do we even have to see her home? How does that come into the story? This is painting the picture of this individual that she was an outlier, I think, and that she was so different from all of her other coworkers. Now, statistically, we know that based on those stats, she had coworkers who were also taking drugs,
yes,
or were alcoholics, or were whatever it was that they were facing.
Mm-hmm.
But there's this attempt to sort of show her as an outlier to the norm.
Yeah, they want to make it look like as strange of a situation as possible, like an anomaly.
Yeah,
so that they can make it look like it's just a one in a million weird thing that happened, and I don't know how she could have figured out how to get those drugs home, and which is very much the tone as well.
Yeah. Now, I wanted to add that again, not for carriers, because they don't have a governing body like this, but for nurses, if there is, and we go back to the independent medical examination, if there is a diagnosis attached, even if that diagnosis is an opioid use disorder, that is a medical diagnosis that then protects that individual's identity. So when the college or governing body releases the information from their investigation, as the public is entitled to, because these governing bodies are meant to protect the public from practice issues of professionals. If there is a medical diagnosis in place, then the person's name and any kind of identifier, like pronouns, are withheld. So we could be, if that was the case in this story, we would be talking about an anonymous individual with no identifiers given. Mm-hmm. But since that opportunity wasn't afforded to her, partly because of her death and partly because of her particular profession, everything was allowed to be exposed. I would also say, though, the issue that is glaring to me is that her union, I thought, was supposed to be protecting her, that the union's interest is in the protection of the employee from the employer or from whatever it is that they might need some protection and support from. Mm-hmm. So is it written in our contracts or in our agreements with our union that in our death, they no longer have to protect us or support us? I don't think so. So shame on that union.
Yeah, definitely a fail there. It's interesting. The person who wrote this article, there's a couple of them that I'm looking at here, two different individuals. but they're digging for answers, and they're talking about how neither the union nor the Health Employers Association of BC collect data on the incidence of addictions among care workers, nor how often they take leave due to addiction issues. So it seems like what you've got is when confidentiality is convenient to keep the veil on what's really going on and prevent useful data, which would give us information about what is really going on here. Is this a problem that's getting worse? Is it a problem that's getting better? How will we ever know what measures we put in place make an impact if they're never tracking even the most basic data? And that's claiming that is an issue with confidentiality, and then showing an individual's the place where they died and printing their name, I mean, is doublespeak.
Yeah. Shameful.
Mm-hmm.
I've got another story here that these are, again, this time we're talking about a nurse. We're not talking about someone who died, but again, I won't say the nurse's name, but this nurse's full name was put in this article. This again goes back to the end of 2016 that the article was written, and this nurse was fired from their health authority after dispensing, quote, an incredible amount of opioid pain medication to people who weren't her patients. This nurse regularly withdrew hydromorphone from her hospital and they give the dates, according to an audit by the governing body. And that opioid was primarily hydromorphone, they say. They say colleagues noticed a suspicious pattern in her behavior, and the authority launched an investigation, and she was fired the next month. Now, again, she did not sort of give any kind of response to that article or contribute to that article, her side of the story. She lost her job and very likely at the end of that story lost her license. Again, without providing any context, without understanding if that nurse did have an opioid use disorder or any kind of medical diagnoses, and maybe it was the absence of that diagnosis that prevented her name from being omitted, but her name was put forward without any context as to why she gave more medication than her colleagues. And in all likelihood, as someone who knows that behavior all too well, there may have been a opioid use disorder diagnosis there.
More than likely, yeah. I mean, first of all, the amount of drugs taken always seems to get exaggerated, and that every vial that's reported with these hydromorph cases is always added up as if the vial is full. There's never any half vials, quarter vials, right, whatever. By the time you're done, it seems like a lot, but people don't understand how much you can get somebody who's, if they've been using hydromorph daily for 2 years, it's who knows what their dose is at. It's with opiates, you can push and push and push, and there's really no ceiling. Some people have incredible resilience to the amount that they could take before there's respiratory problems even.
Yeah.
But so, I mean, I think like I've never heard of a case where a nurse is taking hydromorph and selling it, which would be grounds for getting fired. What I think would be more likely in this case is that the individual probably just didn't fight back or chose to. I've seen it before where people, if they hire a lawyer and the lawyer makes a decision between whether or not the patient has a problem, a medical problem, and if they go with the patient doesn't have a medical problem, then they lose their rights to confidentiality. So their name can be printed and reporters can go nuts with them. I've seen some pretty hilarious stories about a couple cases that I'm quite close with where they're they're talking about, like they made it seem like this individual was a party animal type of thing, and going out and getting street drugs and involved with LSD parties and all this. Like, what in the hell are you talking about? Like, nothing they're saying makes sense. But I think that if you waive your, medical confidentiality that's associated with that diagnosis, then you get a much more favorable end result as far as your career is concerned. But for some reason, well, it's not libelous. If it's not, you'd have to go back and prove that person was exaggerating, whatever. I mean, I'm sure lots of people they're not going to chase down every reporter who prints something ridiculous.
But what you're saying is really, really good information, and it may be helpful to anyone who's listening. Should we have a listener who's struggling themselves right now and thinking, what avenue do I take here to get myself out of this? How do I want to stop? Do I go to my college? Do I follow through with the independent medical examination, or do I just follow through and go to a lawyer or take that route, or just quit? Because to me, the aspect about privacy is kind of a fundamental right that we have. I don't want to come across as saying that these things are not, that protection of the public is not important. I appreciate that protecting the public is an important part that our governing bodies have, and that the public should certainly not have to assume that risk. Although I think that they are assuming some of that risk without even knowing it, because statistically those healthcare professionals are out there. But it's good to know. I wish I had some of that information beforehand, just to know sort of what my rights were, what risks I was taking about if my story should get released or not.
Well, what would you have done, Corey? Like if I could have, if you had access to all the information that you have now, and you were in, back before when you were in that situation where you couldn't, I was in the same place. I couldn't figure my way out of it. I couldn't rationally seem to formulate a plan that worked effectively, at least not for the long term. There was no way to deal with it on my own without, I knew at some point I was going to require help. I didn't know anything about what happens when you ask for help through your employer and governing body. I certainly would not have went that route if I knew that. I would have, the first thing I would have and should have done is confided in my family. I should have started there.
Yeah.
And then I should have gathered information from individuals who have been through the process, and then started learning about, what kind of treatments would work for me. How likely is it that I'll be able to continue in my capacity as a pharmacist? Is there ways to mitigate my danger, the dangers associated with my profession? Those types of things, which in the end would have, the amount of labor and stress and time and horrific experiences, I would have saved myself a lot of trouble. That's not always the case. Sometimes people are sent to a facility that really fits. It solves a problem that they needed to solve, and it sets them on the right path, and it can be an okay starting point. But I don't know, what do you think? If you had the information, would it have made a difference? Because it's hard to say, right?
Yeah, it is hard to say. I think I honestly don't think I would have done anything differently. I think I was, particularly right before I went off work, I was aware that I was increasingly unwell, and that my behavior was ramping up, that my mental health was really deteriorating, and that I was at risk. So I wanted the help. I had the support and unconditional love of my family. I wanted whatever kind of medical help could be offered to me. I knew that that was coming. And I wanted the protection and support of my union and of the people who could sort of help me to navigate it. Again, as this podcast well knows, there are hurdles at every single step. And if you take one route to avoid something else, you will still face another hurdle and another, maybe more than a hurdle, maybe a mountain to climb. But my privacy was really important to me. And in hindsight, it was almost early on, almost too important in that I, as much as I felt isolated from my colleagues, I didn't have a lot of colleagues reaching out to me. I was in contact with 3 colleagues. I probably could have, there were probably other ones that I could have reached out to and had some support from, but I made the decision to kind of sequester myself and get better. But again, if my, in the middle of going through treatment or going through the investigation with my employer, or finally signing that consent agreement, and my story got released to the media, I would have been devastated. Now, here I am talking on a podcast. To me, standing behind my story and owning my story and sharing it on my terms with my voice is very different than it getting unknowingly or without my consent released to the world. And there are even another, and I won't get too far into the article because there's a little bit less to it, but there's even an article where locally within 30 minutes from where I live here, a story where very, very similar to my own, where a nurse was taken off work for opiate use, and all of the details of their consent agreement were released in this local newspaper. So it was as though the journalists just went onto the website of this nursing governing body and copied and pasted. Now, again, it is available online. That is public information. But for it to be kind of spoken through a loudspeaker and amplified like that, I think is unfair and unjust.
Yeah. Well, people don't, it's hard for people to understand, I guess. They read an article and it says, oh, look, this nurse has been stealing drugs from work. And it looks like they're using the drugs at work, and now they're caught, and that's good. We're going to get this person out of there. And then, oh, what's this? They're sending them to treatment, and this person's going to get a chance to work again. What, there's going to be a lot of people who look at that and don't understand, and rightfully so. I mean, it's not. I think it's something that there should be more consideration there. And I think it should be a case-by-case basis. And I still think that there should be maybe not more safeguards, but different safeguards, in that there shouldn't be, the pressure to return so soon. There should be more interest in the person's real mental health overall,
yes,
and their readiness to return, whether it's to an environment that's dangerous or not. And that's, the degree of that is something that needs to be dealt with on a more serious level as well.
Totally,
yeah.
Nathan. And to me, it comes back to stigma, to the importance of the language that we use. And if we are using language that is harmful, as particularly in that first article that we talked about, that is not only language that harms the individual, but it perpetuates stigma. And to the person who's reading it, who maybe has some underlying opinions about drug users, for example, that just builds that stigma up even further potentially. And this is why I really think that what we're facing is not only like to pan back and look at the bigger picture. I think it's far more accurate to call it the war on drug users than just the war on drugs.
It is the war on drug users. Absolutely.
And the part about healthcare workers is a part of the war on drug users.
Yeah, it's so strange, man. I mean, and I think if you're going to take the stance where you want to go, the old school conservative approach, that person loses their job, loses their license forever. It's treated like a criminal case or whatever. You're going to have the same problems that we're having with the never-ending losing battle against the ever more powerful drugs that are getting into this country because they're illegal. It's like the less you understand a problem and the more layers you put between that problem and yourself, it doesn't make the problem go away. It makes the problem worse. So if you want to have a hospital where, let's say right now, the number that everyone uses is 10%. So say we got 10% of everybody in the hospital is maybe either hungover, still sort of high from smoking weed that morning, actively using opiates, whatever it is that we would call in the classic case impaired. That's a whole other subject as to, I don't like how that's broadly used as impaired. Mm-hmm. Are they impaired? Mm-hmm. We don't know because we don't have the data. But for this conversation, we'll say they're impaired.
Yeah.
Now, do you want to just ignore that problem by making it so that everybody knows that if they reach out for help or become public, it's game over for them? So what are those people going to do? They're going to go hard in the paint. They're going to make sure their game is tight, for as long as possible, instead of, no, maybe maybe I can get some help. You want to leave, you have to leave a door open for people to get help.
Yeah.
If you're ever seriously interested in improving the problem. If you're not, and you like the way things are right now, then by all means.
Yeah. The thing that came to mind for me, and it's a whole other conversation, so we don't have to get too far into it, but we're talking about Canada, where relatively speaking, it's still quite gentle compared to our southern progressive compared to our southern neighbors.
Oh man.
It doesn't take a very long Google search to see the vast cases of nurses in the United States who did the exact same thing as all of the nurses in Canada who have diverted narcotics for their own personal use, and they end up in jail.
I know. I was watching a news, I don't know what the hell it was, like a Fifth Estate style show or whatever. And here's this couple standing on the porch. The woman is crying. She's the nurse. And it was her husband. Her husband turned her into the police because he found, and she's convinced that he did the right thing. And, now they're going to, finally, my license is gone. I spent some time getting, I'm going to be in jail, but it's the right thing. And I'm like, holy shit. Yeah. Like, what in the hell is going on down there? I mean, that is wild.
Yeah. So, as much as I'm sort of talking about, the loss of privacy and the loss of autonomy by having your story put in the newspaper, or, maybe even these stories whose names were withheld. And we're talking about the implication that this might keep a healthcare professional in the shadows. Down there, if you're thinking, okay, I can either stay in the shadows and just try to figure out this addictive behavior of mine on my own and do whatever I can to stop, or I'm going to jail if I get caught.
I mean, that's next level. Imagine the pressure, right? You've got this monkey on your back already that you can't shake. But now, you're playing for keeps. You're going to have a criminal record. I mean, you think it's embarrassing to go to rehab. How about, they remove you in cuffs and take you to jail right from your workplace? I mean, my God. Yeah, and nobody would, it would be, I would imagine they would have more people running right to the end of whatever addictive cycle they've got going, or just going all the way through and making it, right?
Yeah. And you could be a healthcare professional who, served the public for 20 years and maybe develop some post-traumatic stress, or maybe you're whatever's happening in your life, and you start diverting some opiates that work to manage your symptoms, and now you're locked into a sentence for that. It's shocking to me. And it's like, if you needed more evidence that the prison industrial complex was steering the ship, holy smokes.
It's so wild. It's 2022, and you look at some of these systems that are in place, and I cannot wrap my mind around how the lack of understanding and progression it keeps hitting this. It's like there's an invisible wall. It's like something is keeping these systems alive and in place, and it's past the point of reason. I mean, that all these people involved in these stories we're talking about, they're not stupid people.
No,
they understand that some of the things they're saying. I mean, there's a couple paragraphs in here where the individual starts the paragraph saying one thing, and by the time they're finished, they're contradicting themselves, because you can't hold the cohesion of this kind of where they're riding the rails and they're in the two camps at the same time thing. It's just, I guess maybe we're so used to it or something, because our society is so filled with it, and there's such a lack of integrity. I don't know, man. Who knows, really? But it is very interesting. It's the psychology of it, the social dynamics of it. How is it perpetuated? Obviously money's involved, and treatment centers, they don't want to let anything go because they're making money. But man, are we behind on this? Really badly behind.
Yeah, we are. And I was just thinking that there's another parallel there, is that flipping on, and I don't watch the evening news. I'll read articles online, maybe for a little bit, maybe once a day, but I'm not sitting down to the 6 o'clock news. But the way images are shown there, they will frequently show, particularly when they talk about the toxic drug crisis, they'll show someone being resuscitated. They'll show someone overdosing on the side of the road. And that individual has a story and has a history and has a family. And I guess all I'm pleading for is a little bit of sensitivity to the fact that there are individuals behind all of these stories.
Well, yeah. And I mean, I guess I hope this isn't the case, but maybe if things continue in the direction that we're going in here, we're either going to kind of evolve and make, continue to see positive change, or we're going to get to a point where so many people are succumbing to, toxic drugs, or just they're relying so heavily on substances to get through the day that everybody knows somebody very close to them who has died. I mean, we're not that far away from it here in BC.
Yeah.
So, we've talked about this before, and whether or not that's, what it'll take to have that kind of an impact. But I think the scarier the situation is, the more in general the public wants to look at it. They want to look at it, but they don't want to get close to it. You know what I mean?
I do. And if we're going to get close to it, let's be fair. Top healthcare CEO earns $250,000 a year and drinks 3 glasses of wine with dinner every night. Let's do it. Let's do it equally, or not do it at all.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I don't know, man. It's a strange one, but we're going to keep looking at it.
Yeah, it's a part of the whole picture, though. To me, having the discussion that we just had, it's like looking at the whole puzzle. This is another piece of that puzzle, I think.
Absolutely. And this little corner of the puzzle is very much attached to the swirling epicenter that is, spitting out these bizarre symptoms from our culture, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So
absolutely.
yeah, you can't focus on everything. And at least I can't. I don't even want to try.
Oh my God, no, same.
But even this stuff, man, sometimes I really have to, I find myself, I have to go easy on Twitter. It's just, man, because a lot of people, you can feel their energy on there, and they're angry, man. They're so frustrated, and and they have reason to be frustrated. They're just, they're watching their friends die. They're seeing the same nonsense policies being perpetuated endlessly. It's it's hard to watch. I try and spruce up my feed with some funny stuff and everything, but it's not enough.
Yeah. And that kind of echo chamber of negativity. I go back to the cognitive behavioral therapy idea that a thought leads to a feeling, leads to a behavior. And so if you're inundated with all of this information that creates negative thinking and creates just negativity in general, that generates a negative feeling within our bodies and a stress within our bodies that we then have to try to soothe and cope with. So sometimes just turning it off and limiting it is the best way.
Yeah. Yeah, that's absolutely true.
Yeah.
Well, Corey, I guess we should tell people you have a new, you're heading in a new direction here with your career now. And is it okay to say that you've accepted a position? You want to tell us about that a little bit?
Yeah, just accepted a new position within a community very close to my own, working with a community services organization in a farm setting. So working with the community to generate food and to educate the public, to engage the public, engage people who are either marginalized or at risk. And it's a very kind of cool, innovative program. And so as I step away from the world of healthcare, I feel very fortunate to be moving into something that's so kind of constructive and so filled with good intentions and good feeling. So,
yeah, I think it's going to be an awesome opportunity for you. And I think they're lucky they got you, because this is there's a lot of opportunities here, and a lot I think just with the people you're going to be working with and the contacts you'll make in your community. I think it's going to be great. Looking forward to it. Yeah,
likewise. Well, Nathan, thanks for chatting with me tonight. Good luck to you tomorrow as you go under the scalpel, and we'll all be cheering for you.
All right, please do. Hopefully we'll see you next time.
Thanks. See you soon, everybody.